Close your eyes, feel the weight of your body settle, let the present moment fade away. Now, step backward through time, not years, not centuries, but thousands of years. Keep going, further, deeper into the past. Millions of years dissolve like mist. You are standing somewhere you have never been, somewhere no modern human has stood in living memory. Open your eyes, you are on the edge of an ancient sea. The air is thick, it is warm, not the warmth of a summer afternoon, but something older, denser, more saturated with moisture. The sky above you is a pale, washed-out blue, and the sun, though recognizably the same sun, feels closer, more insistent, pressing its heat down onto a world that has no word for shade. The temperature hovers at around 32 degrees Celsius, not just at the surface, everywhere. The water before you is extraordinary. It is not the blue of modern oceans. It is green gold shot through with bioluminescent threads, shallow enough near the shore that you can see the shapes of enormous spiraling shells resting on the sea floor below. Ammonites, each one a meter wide, some larger. They drift in slow, ancient circles, entirely indifferent to your presence. This is their world, not yours. You are standing at the edge of the Tethys Sea. It is approximately 160 million years ago. The Jurassic period is in its full, extraordinary prime. The supercontinent of Pangaea has been splitting apart for roughly 50 million years, and the Tethys has been filling the wound. A vast, shallow, warm body of water stretching from what will one day become Western Europe all the way eastward to what will one day become the Himalayas. Oh, the sea is immense. It is everywhere. It is alive. Breathe. Feel how still the air is. Now look out at the water. Look past the shallow reef, past the ammonites, past the pale, ghostly shapes of Cryptoclidus, long-necked pliosaurs moving in slow, elegant arcs beneath the surface, their necks extended like question marks in the green-gold water. Look further, deeper, into the blue dark beyond the shelf edge. Something is moving out there. It is not large at first. It appears as a shadow, a displacement, a long, smooth ripple that pushes outward from some point 50 meters below the surface. Then it becomes shape. Then it becomes size. And then, and only then, does your mind begin to understand what your eyes are seeing. It is 11 meters long. Some individuals are longer. Its body is compact, barrel-shaped, driven forward by 4 massive hydrofoil flippers, each one longer than you are tall. Its skull, that extraordinary skull, is nearly 1.5 meters in length. The jaws are lined with interlocking conical teeth, each one the size of a large cucumber, designed not to slice, but to grip and puncture and hold. It is not built for speed in the way a shark is built for speed. It is built for power, for inevitability. This is Liopleurodon ferox. It is the apex predator of the Jurassic seas. There is nothing in this ocean, not the long-necked pliosaurs, not the ichthyosaurs, not the armored fish reaching 10 meters in length, not the hibidont sharks patrolling the shallow reefs, that does not yield to this animal. It sits at the very top of the food chain that this ancient world has spent 160 million years constructing. Watch it move. Watch those flippers generate thrust in slow, oscillating sweeps. The water bends around its body without resistance. It is not fast in any explosive sense, but it is relentless, and it is efficient, and it reads the water through nostrils that can detect a single drop of blood diluted through 10,000 liters of seawater. It already knows you are here. It has known for several minutes. It has simply not decided you are interesting. It banks, slowly, languidly, and descends again into the dark. The year is, as best as science can estimate, somewhere between 163 and 155 million years ago. You are standing on sediment that will one day be compressed into the Oxford Clay Formation of central England, where, in the summer of 1873, a French paleontologist named Henri Sauvage will hold the first identified teeth of this animal in his hands and understand, with the careful, methodical awe that only a scientist in full possession of evidence can feel, that something enormous once lived here. But that discovery is 160 million years in your future. Right now, there is only the sea. There is only the heat. There is only the immense breathing weight of a world that is nothing like the one you left behind. The carbon dioxide in this atmosphere sits at approximately 1,950 parts per million, nearly 5 times what the modern world contains. The sea level is approximately 170 meters higher than the coastlines you know. There are no polar ice caps. There is no permafrost. There is no winter, not truly, only a longer season and a slightly shorter one, both warm, both wet, and both teeming. Life in this world is not struggling, it is overflowing. You hear something behind you, a low, resonant disturbance in the water, barely audible, more felt than heard, a pressure wave moving through the shallows. You look back at the deeper water. The shadow has returned. It is larger now, or closer. The light filters down through 4 meters of warm, ancient seawater and illuminates the great animal in fragments. The slate-grey flank, the white cream underside, the long sweep of the tail, the terrible, deliberate grace of those 4 flippers. It is not hunting you. Liopleurodon ferox does not hunt things it cannot easily consume. You are too small, too unfamiliar, too irrelevant to its ancient calculus of energy expenditure. But it passes close enough that the pressure wave reaches you, a gentle push against your legs. A reminder that you are standing at the edge of someone else's empire. And then it is gone. Back into the deep. Back into the green dark of the Tethys. Back into the 160 million years of uninterrupted dominion that this animal and its lineage held over this extraordinary, vanished world. You watch the water until it is still again. And then you ask the question that has no simple answer. What if it never left? What if the great extinction events that swept away the non-avian dinosaurs and reorganized the entire architecture of life on Earth? What if, for Liopleurodon and its kind, those catastrophes were not endings but merely obstacles? What if the lineage that produced this vast, ancient, perfectly engineered predator had persisted? What if, somewhere in the warm, the darkening depths of what remains of the Tethys Sea today, in the Mediterranean, in the Black Sea, in the warm passages between what were once shallow Jurassic reefs, something was still out there? What would it look like now? What would the world look like around it? And what does it mean, truly mean, that an animal of such extraordinary perfection once existed in a world so completely unlike our own, and that the only evidence of its entire reign is a scattered collection of bones pressed into English clay, waiting 160 million years to be found? If you enjoy journeys like this one, consider subscribing. There is much more waiting for you. The story of Liopleurodon begins not with the animal itself, but with a tooth. In 1873, the French paleontologist Henri-Émile Sauvage was studying a collection of fossil material recovered from Jurassic Age deposits in the Boulonnais region of northern France, near the town of Boulogne-sur-Mer, when he encountered several large, conical teeth that did not match anything in the existing fossil record he knew. The teeth were unlike those of the mosasaurs, unlike those of the ichthyosaurs, unlike anything that had been formerly catalogued in the European Jurassic fauna. They were heavy, slightly curved, with fine longitudinal ridges running along their outer surface. They spoke of a jaw of extraordinary mechanical power. Sauvage named the animal they came from Liopleurodon ferox, a name derived from the Greek words for smooth, side, and tooth, combined with the Latin ferox, meaning fierce or savage. He could not have known, from those teeth alone, what he was naming. The full picture would take another century to emerge. In England, the Oxford clay formation was already yielding remarkable specimens. The Oxford clay stretches across a broad band of central England from Oxfordshire through Northamptonshire and into Cambridgeshire, representing a thick sequence of marine sediments deposited during the Colovian and Oxfordian stages of the late Jurassic period, roughly 163 to 155 million years ago. The clay formed in a shallow, warm tropical sea that covered much of what is now England at that time, a shallow arm of the greater Tethys system, known today as the Sundance Sea, or in the European context, simply as the late Jurassic epicontinental sea. The sediments are extraordinarily fine, deposited slowly in low energy. The oxygen-depleted bottom waters that preserved organic material and bone with remarkable fidelity. Brickmakers working the Oxford clay in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, excavating clay from enormous open-pit quarries near Peterborough in Cambridgeshire, regularly turned up large marine reptile bones. Many of these were fragmentary, some were spectacular. In 1891, the British paleontologist Richard Lydekker formally described several pliosaur specimens from the Peterborough area, contributing to an emerging picture of a dominant large-bodied predator in the Jurassic seas. Lydekker was a prolific and meticulous researcher at the Natural History Museum in London, and his descriptions of Oxford clay plesiosaurs and pliosaurs helped establish the taxonomic framework that paleontologists still work within today. But the greatest single contribution to understanding Liopleurodon came from the work of Samuel Woodward, and later from the comprehensive studies of Richard Forrest and Roger Benson at the University of Cambridge. Benson, in particular, conducted a rigorous phylogenetic analysis, published in 2012 in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, which helped clarify the evolutionary relationships between various pliosaur lineages and placed Liopleurodon more firmly within its broader family tree. These analyses are dry reading for the non-specialist, full of cladistic matrices and character state assessments, but their conclusions are quietly extraordinary. They reveal an animal that was the product of nearly 50 million years of continuous marine evolution, refining the pliosaur body plan across generation after generation of deepening seas and shifting continents. What do we actually know about Liopleurodon's physical characteristics? Considerably more than popular culture has suggested, and considerably less than some of the more enthusiastic estimates of the late 20th century implied. The famous 1999 BBC documentary Walking with Dinosaurs depicted Liopleurodon as reaching lengths of up to 25 meters, a figure that would have made it the largest predator ever to have lived. This estimate, however, was based on a significant extrapolation from very partial material and has since been substantially revised downward by the scientific community. The most complete and well-studied specimens of Liopleurodon ferox indicate an animal reaching approximately 6 to 7 meters in total length for standard adults, with exceptional individuals potentially reaching 10 to perhaps 12 meters, though skeletal material supporting the upper end of that range is fragmentary and contested. To understand why even a 7-meter Liopleurodon was a formidable presence in its ecosystem, it is necessary to understand the mechanics of the pliosaur body plan. Pliosaurs belong to the order Plesiosauria, but they represent a distinct evolutionary direction within that order, the short-necked, large-headed branch, as opposed to the long-necked, small-headed plesiosaurs such as Cryptoclidus and Elasmosaurus. The pliosaur skull is disproportionately large relative to body length, comprising in some species nearly 1/4 of the total body length. In Liopleurodon, the skull was robustly built, with a long, low snout and an extremely wide temporal region housing powerful jaw-closing musculature. Biomechanical studies of related pliosaur skulls, particularly the work conducted on the Predator X specimen from Svalbard, a different but related pliosaur discovered in 2007 and formally described as Pliosaurus funke, suggest bite forces among the highest recorded for any known animal, exceeding 33,000 newtons in some estimates. While Liopleurodon was smaller than Pliosaurus fungi, the basic mechanical architecture was similar, and its bite was almost certainly among the most powerful in its contemporary ecosystem. With the four-flipper swimming mode of pliosaurs, and plesiosaurs in general, is one of the most distinctive features of these animals, and it has been the subject of considerable scientific debate. Unlike the side-to-side tail undulation of fish or the dorsoventral tail oscillation of modern cetaceans such as dolphins and whales, plesiosaurs and pliosaurs moved through the water by oscillating all four limbs in a coordinated rowing or flying motion, much more analogous to the wing beats of a sea turtle or a penguin than to any fish-like locomotion. Computer modeling studies by researchers, including Adam Smith and colleagues, have demonstrated that this four-flipper mode was mechanically efficient for sustained cruising rather than explosive bursts of acceleration, in making Liopleurodon an endurance hunter, an animal that pursued prey over distance rather than relying on ambush from short range. Its top speed is estimated at approximately 10 km per hour in sustained cruising, with possible short bursts of up to 15 km per hour, which is comparable to the sustained swimming speed of a modern great white shark. The sensory capabilities of Liopleurodon deserve particular attention, as they reveal an animal that was extraordinarily well integrated into its environment in ways that go beyond brute physical power. Like all plesiosaurs and pliosaurs, Liopleurodon possessed large narial openings, paired nostrils positioned at the front of the snout. Research published by Darren Naish and colleagues, as well as work by Hilary Ketchum at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, has suggested that plesiosaurs may have used a form of directional olfaction in water, a process by which water enters the forward-facing narial openings as the animal swims, passes over olfactory sensory tissue inside the nasal passages, and exits through rear-facing openings, allowing the animal to effectively smell in stereo, detecting minute chemical gradients in the water and using the differential signal between the two nostrils to triangulate the location of a scent source. This would have made Liopleurodon an extraordinarily effective tracker in open water conditions, capable of detecting dissolved organic compounds, blood, metabolic waste, reproductive fluids, across distances of hundreds of meters in calm water. The brain of Liopleurodon, while no soft tissue survives, can be partially inferred from endocasts, the internal impressions left by the brain on the inner surface of the brain case. Comparative analysis of plesiosaur endocasts by Emily Buchholz at Wellesley College has indicated that these animals possessed well-developed olfactory bulbs, consistent with heavy reliance on chemosensory information, and relatively large optic lobes, suggesting that vision was also important, particularly in the well-lit shallow waters of the Jurassic epicontinental seas, where light penetration was excellent. The combination of acute olfaction, strong vision, and powerful locomotion made Liopleurodon one of the most sensorially sophisticated predators its world had ever produced. The diet of Liopleurodon, as inferred from the size and shape of its teeth, the mechanical properties of its jaw, and the composition of other animals in its ecosystem, was broad and opportunistic. The interlocking conical teeth were not designed for slicing. They were not the blade-like teeth of a carnivorous theropod dinosaur or the serrated triangles of a large shark. They were gripping teeth. They were designed to penetrate and hold fast, making escape by prey animals extremely difficult once contact was made. Stomach contents have not been recovered from Liopleurodon specimens, but related pliosaurs have been found with traces of ichthyosaur bone and plesiosaur bone in their gut regions, strongly suggesting that Liopleurodon was willing and able to tackle other large marine reptiles in addition to fish, squid, and ammonites. The Tethys Sea in which Liopleurodon lived and hunted was not a single, unified ocean in the way the Pacific or Atlantic are unified today. It was a complex system of shallow epicontinental seas, deeper open water passages, and partially enclosed basins, all connected by the broad equatorial seaway that separated Laurasia, the northern landmass including what would become Europe, Asia, and North America, from Gondwana, the southern landmass including what would become Africa, South America, India, and Antarctica. During the Colovian and Oxfordian stages of the late Jurassic, sea levels stood approximately 170 meters higher than today, meaning that enormous areas of present-day land were submerged beneath warm, shallow tropical water. The British Isles, as we know them, did not exist. In their place were a series of low islands and shallow, reef-fringed lagoons, the Jurassic equivalent of the modern Bahamas, bathed in water averaging between 24 and 29 degrees Celsius year-round. These warm, nutrient-rich shallow seas supported a biological productivity of extraordinary magnitude. The base of the food chain was dominated by planktonic organisms, coccolithophores, dinoflagellates, and early forms of foraminifera, whose calcium carbonate shells, when they died and sank, gradually accumulated to form the chalk deposits that now underlie much of southern England and northern France. Above these primary producers came the great shoals of fish, Pachycormus, Catarus, Leptolepis, hundreds of millions of individuals moving in silver, shifting curtains through the sunlit upper water column. And feeding on these fish were the extraordinary diversity of marine reptiles that characterized the Jurassic seas. The streamlined ichthyosaurs, such as Ophthalmosaurus, with their enormous eyes adapted for hunting in low-light conditions, the long-necked plesiosaurs, such as Cryptoclidus, using their needle-toothed jaws to snatch fish from shoals, the marine crocodilians, such as Metriorhynchus, armored and aggressive in the shallows, and above all of them, presiding over the entire ecosystem from its position at the apex, Liopleurodon. The fossil record, though necessarily incomplete, gives us a picture of an animal that was widespread across the Jurassic epicontinental seas of Europe. Liopleurodon fossils, primarily teeth and partial skull material with some post-cranial elements, have been recovered from deposits in England, France, and Germany, spanning a range of approximately 3,000 kilometers east to west. This wide distribution suggests that Liopleurodon was an active, wide-ranging predator capable of crossing open water passages and exploiting resources across a large geographic area, much as modern, large predatory sharks, such as the great white, move across entire ocean basins in pursuit of seasonal prey concentrations. What ended Liopleurodon? The genus itself appears to disappear from the fossil record sometime during the Oxfordian stage, approximately 155 million years ago, at a time when the shallow epicontinental seas that had covered much of Europe began to regress, to pull back as sea levels fell slightly and the growing Atlantic widened and deepened, changing the circulation patterns and nutrient dynamics of the seas. The pliosaur lineage as a whole survived this transition and continued to diversify into the Cretaceous period, producing even larger forms such as Kronosaurus in the southern hemisphere and the enormous Pliosaurus funki in the Arctic seas around 145 million years ago. But Liopleurodon ferox, as a species and a genus, appears to have been tied to the specific ecological conditions of the Jurassic epicontinental seas. And when those conditions changed, the animal that had been so perfectly adapted to them was lost. It is a story that has been repeated across deep time, again and again. The most perfectly adapted animals are often the most vulnerable to fundamental change, not because they are weak, but because they are exquisite, refined to such precision that when the world they are refined for ceases to exist, there is nowhere else for that precision to go. But science, in this case, is not content with endings, and neither are we. To truly understand what was lost when Liopleurodon vanished from the fossil record, you must first understand the world it inhabited, not as an abstraction, not as a geological period defined by boundary events and isotope curves, but as a living, breathing, sensory reality. A world with weight and color and temperature and sound. Settle back. let your breathing slow. We are going to spend some time here, in the Jurassic, in the Tethys, in the long warm afternoon of a world that preceded you by 160 million years. It is approximately 158 million years ago, late in the Oxfordian stage of the Jurassic period. You are floating in the warm, shallow waters of the European Tethys, perhaps 40 meters below the surface, are in water that feels like the inside of a warm bath, somewhere between 27 and 30 degrees Celsius, depending on depth and season. The water itself is extraordinarily clear in the shallower zones, a translucent aquamarine blue-green that allows sunlight to penetrate in long undulating columns, illuminating the seafloor in shifting patterns of pale gold and shadow. Deeper, beyond the shelf edge, the water transitions to a darker, richer blue, and then to a deep indigo that finally becomes the absolute featureless dark of the basin floor. The chemistry of this water is slightly different from anything in the modern world. The carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere, approximately 1,950 parts per million compared to around 420 parts per million today, means that the ocean's carbonate system is slightly altered, though not in ways that would be visible to the eye. What is visible, what is immediately overwhelming, is the sheer density of life. There is life everywhere, in every direction, at every depth, in quantities that the modern ocean, depleted by millions of years of evolutionary turnover and, ultimately, by geological catastrophe, can scarcely equal. Near the surface, the water is white with plankton, dense, cloudy blooms of coccolithophores, microscopic organisms barely a few micrometers across, each one encased in an intricate armor of calcium carbonate plates. When they die, those plates sink in a continuous slow rain to the seafloor, adding millimeter by millimeter to the thick chalk deposits that are slowly building up across the ocean floor. You can sometimes see this, not the individual plates, but the collective effect, a faint, diffuse haziness in the sunlit upper water column, a softening of the light that gives the Tethys in high summer an almost luminous, dreamy quality, as though the sea itself is generating its own gentle light. Just below the sunlit zone, at a depth of perhaps 20 to 30 meters, is where the real drama of the Tethys begins. This is the realm of the great fish shoals. Pachycormus maximus moves through this zone in schools that beggar modern comprehension. This animal, one of the dominant large fish of the Jurassic seas, reaches up to 2.5 meters in length with a deeply forked tail, a streamlined body, and a long, slightly upturned jaw lined with small, sharp teeth. It is silver along the flanks, fading to white on the belly with a faint iridescent sheen that catches the filtered sunlight and scatters it in brief, brilliant flashes. The schools number in the hundreds of thousands. Their collective movement through the water creates a sound, a vast, soft, shushing vibration, more pressure than noise, that permeates the water column for hundreds of meters in every direction. Below and around the Pachycormus schools swim the smaller fish, Leptolepis, slender, fast, herring-like animals barely 15 centimeters long, and Catyrus, a more robust, predatory fish in the half-meter range, with a powerful tail and a distinctly aggressive disposition for an animal of its size. These smaller fish move in dense, tight formations, their collective behavior governed by the same ancient algorithms that still govern modern schooling fish, each individual responding to the movement of its nearest neighbors. The whole school capable of transforming its shape in an instant, rippling and contracting around any perceived threat with the fluid, instantaneous response of a single organism rather than a collection of individuals. And the threats are many. Ophthalmosaurus isenicus, perhaps the most hauntingly beautiful predator of the Jurassic seas, moves through the upper water column in pairs and small groups, its body as streamlined as a tuna, its tail as lunate as a shark's. What makes Ophthalmosaurus immediately distinctive, what makes it impossible to forget once you have seen it in the water, are its eyes. Each eye is approximately 23 centimeters in diameter, the largest relative to body size of any vertebrate for which we have skeletal evidence. They are set in a large sclerotic ring of interlocking bone plates that help the eyeball maintain its shape against the pressure of deep water, suggesting that Ophthalmosaurus was capable of diving to depths of several hundred meters in pursuit of squid and fish that retreat from the surface during daylight hours. In the sunlit shallows, those enormous eyes have a peculiar, slightly otherworldly quality, reflective, deep, full of a calm intelligence that feels somehow more present, more considered than the blank stares of most fish. Ophthalmosaurus does not fear you. It barely notices you. It sweeps past in a blur of silver-grey motion, banking steeply to follow a school of leptolepis, its body flexing in that fish-like undulation that ichthyosaurs had evolved so perfectly that their skeletons are sometimes confused with those of actual fish. Deeper, at the edge of the sunlit zone, the long-necked plesiosaurs begin. Cryptoclydus eurimerus is the most common large plesiosaur in this ecosystem. Not as dramatic as Liopleurodon, not as streamlined as Ophthalmosaurus, but possessed of its own quiet, persistent magnificence. It is approximately 4 meters in total body length, with a neck that makes up almost half of that length. Long, sinuous, flexible, ending in a small, lightly built head, with a long snout and a jaw full of slender, interlocking teeth, perfectly designed for catching small fish and squid. The body is broad and compact, the 4 flippers large and powerful, moving in that characteristic plesiosaur oscillation that generates lift as well as thrust, allowing the animal to maneuver in 3 dimensions with surprising agility. The skin, preserved in exceptional specimens as an impression, appears to have been smooth and leathery, without scales, possibly dark along the dorsal surface for camouflage from above, and pale on the ventral surface to blend with the light filtering down from the surface when viewed from below. In the filtered green-gold light of the Tethys, a cruising Cryptoclydus is almost invisible until it is close. A ghost animal, all soft curves and slow rhythmic movement, trailing a faint contrail of disturbed water behind each flipper stroke. Metriorhynchus moves differently from any other animal in this ecosystem. It looks, at first glance, more like a large crocodilian, roughly 3 meters in length, with a long, narrow snout and a body armored in osteoderms, those bony scutes embedded in the skin that give it a rough, angular texture when you pass your hand over a fossil specimen and try to imagine the living animal. But unlike its terrestrial crocodilian cousins, Metriorhynchus has lost most of its heavy armor over evolutionary time, reducing the osteoderms to achieve a more hydrodynamic profile in the water, and has developed a vertically oriented tail fluke, analogous in function, though not in origin, to the tail of a shark. It is a faster animal than its armored appearance suggests, and it hunts the shallower reef zones aggressively, driving itself through schools of fish with rapid, side-to-side undulation of its powerful tail. There is something deeply satisfying about watching Metriorhynchus hunt. It has none of the languid elegance of Cryptoclydus, none of the machine-like efficiency of Ophthalmosaurus. It is all aggression and momentum, a creature built for the shallow, reef-fractured zones where speed and turning ability matter more than endurance. The reefs themselves, and they are reefs in the loosest modern sense of the term, are structures built primarily by sponges and corals interspersed with thick forests of crinoids, those extraordinarily beautiful animals that look like underwater flowers, long feathery arms radiating from a central cup, anchored to the substrate by a flexible stalk, filtering the nutrient-rich water that flows through the reef channels with a patience that is entirely geological. In the Jurassic, crinoids were enormously abundant, far more diverse and numerous than their greatly reduced modern populations suggest, and the Tethys reefs were draped in them in dense, colorful, slowly waving carpets of purple and gold and pale orange, lending the seafloor the appearance of an enormous, improbably decorated garden. Interspersed between the crinoid forests were the great ammonites, not the planktonic varieties drifting in the water column above, but the benthic forms, the large coiled cephalopods resting on or near the seafloor, their siphons extended to draw in water and propel themselves in slow, jerky movements across the sediment surface. But the reef community is only one layer of this world's extraordinary complexity. Out beyond the reef edge, where the seafloor drops away into the cooler, darker water of the mid-shelf and the shelf break, the ecology shifts entirely. Here, in the open water at depths of between 50 and 150 meters, a creature moves that is, in its own way, as remarkable as Liopleurodon, though at the opposite end of the predatory spectrum. Liopleurodon problematicus, the largest fish of the Jurassic seas and possibly the largest bony fish ever to have lived, moves through this zone in long, slow arcs, its vast body, estimated at up to 16 meters in total length, comparable in scale to a modern whale shark, displacing the water in front of it with the unhurried momentum of something that has nothing to fear from anything smaller than itself. Liopleurodon is not a predator in the conventional sense. Its jaws, though enormous, are lined not with cutting teeth, but with a dense array of fine, comb-like gill rakers that filter plankton and small fish from the water as it swims, straining enormous volumes through its cavernous mouth with each slow, sweeping pass. The animal is so large that it generates its own hydrodynamic shadow, a zone of depressed pressure immediately behind it, where smaller fish gather to rest in the reduced drag, much as modern fish gather in the slipstream of large sharks. From a distance, Liopleurodon appears simply as a vast, dark shape against the pale light filtering down from above, featureless, immense, slow, and somehow calming in its absolute indifference to the frantic biological activity surrounding it. Near the reef edge, in the turbulent water where the shelf current meets the shallow platform, another predator occupies the middle tier of the food chain with a focused, muscular efficiency that is entirely unlike the languid filtering of Liopleurodon or the broad-ranging cruising of Liopleurodon. Dacosaurus maximus, the largest of the metriorhynchid marine crocodilians, reaching up to 4 meters in length, is built like a biological torpedo, round in cross-section with a relatively blunt, high-roofed skull that biomechanical studies suggest was designed for seizing large, struggling prey rather than simply snapping at small fish. Its teeth are laterally compressed and serrated, unlike the rounded, conical teeth of Liopleurodon, blade-like structures that could cut as well as grip, suggesting a diet that included large, soft-bodied prey such as ammonites and medium-sized marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs was recovered from late Jurassic and early Cretaceous deposits across Europe and South America, suggesting it was a wide-ranging animal capable of traversing significant open-water passages. In the Tethys of 158 million years ago, it moves through the reef channels with a muscular, side-to-side tail undulation that is recognizably crocodilian, hunting the large ammonites that cluster in the calmer water between the reef structures, with a methodical patience that its appearance of constant aggressive motion entirely belies. The coastline of the Jurassic Tethys, if you turn from the open water and look toward the horizon in the direction from which the current flows, is a low, hazy, barely differentiated line of pale limestone and dark green vegetation that is nothing like the bold, cliffed, geologically active coastlines of the modern world. The islands and low peninsulas that punctuate the margins of the Jurassic epicontinental sea are the exposed tops of tilted fault blocks, barely elevated above sea level, worn to gentle rounded shapes by the consistent warmth and rainfall of a climate that has no frost, no ice, no permafrost to crack and shatter the rock. The vegetation along the shoreline is dominated by cycads and ferns and early conifers. No flowering plants, no grasses, no deciduous trees that drop their leaves in autumn, giving the Jurassic coast a fixed, feathery, dark green character that looks more like a reef of vegetation than the varied, seasonal, color-shifting coastlines we know. Behind the immediate shoreline, the ground is wet and soft, crossed by broad, nor shallow rivers that carry their sediment load of fine calcareous silt down to the sea in broad, fan-shaped deltas where the fresh water mixes with the salt in great spreading plumes of slightly turbid, slightly cooler water that attract the smaller fish of the shallows in large foraging aggregations. The seasonal rhythm of the Jurassic Tethys is subtle compared to anything the modern world would recognize as a season. There is no winter, there is no snow, no leaf fall, no migration of birds to warmer latitudes as the sun retreats. But there are seasons of a kind, a slightly wetter period and a slightly drier one, driven by the enormous monsoon-like circulation patterns that the Jurassic atmosphere generated over the warm, land-enclosed tropical sea. During the wetter season, the river inputs to the sea increase, delivering pulses of dissolved nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, silica, that trigger blooms of planktonic productivity across the shallow shelf. These blooms are visible from above as green-brown patches in the otherwise blue-green water, spreading and drifting with the surface current over areas of hundreds of square kilometers. They attract everything. Shoals of pachycormus converge on the bloom boundaries, feeding intensively on the dense zooplankton that aggregates at the edges of the nutrient-rich zones. Cryptocleidos gather in unusually large numbers in the same areas, their long necks sweeping through the dense fish concentrations in wide, rapid arcs. And in the deeper water below the bloom, where the sinking organic material from the surface creates a secondary pulse of productivity in the mid-water zooplankton, Liopleurodon spends more time than usual in the shallower zones, drawn upward by the density of prey that the seasonal productivity pulse generates. These are the most productive weeks of the Jurassic year. The water is alive in a way that even its ordinary extraordinary state does not quite capture. The light filtering down through the plankton-thickened surface water is green and diffuse, broken into wavering columns by the constant gentle swell. And in that green light, the movement of fish and marine reptiles is so dense and so continuous that the water seems, at times, less like a medium through which animals are moving and more like a single enormous breathing organism, all of its parts in constant motion, all of them connected by the chemical threads of food and fear and the slow, patient cycling of nutrients from the surface to the floor and back again. On the seafloor itself, beneath the reefs and the crinoid gardens, the sediment is a pale, fine-grained calcareous ooze, essentially the same material that will one day become the white chalk of the English Downs, but here, at the moment of its creation, soft and yielding and full of the burrowing activity of innumerable worms and mollusks. The oxygen content of the bottom water varies dramatically across the Tethys. In the deeper, more enclosed basins, the bottom is anoxic, devoid of oxygen, a dead zone where organic matter accumulates undisturbed and the only organisms are anaerobic bacteria processing the rain of dead material from above. These anoxic zones are the reason the Oxford clay preserves its fossils so well. Any large animal that sinks to the bottom of such a zone will decompose slowly, its bones dispersing gradually in the still, airless water rather than being broken apart and scattered by scavengers. Above the seafloor, above the reefs, above the crinoid gardens and the fish shoals and the pliosaurs and the ichthyosaurs, the surface of the Tethys is a constant, gentle drama of weather and light. The Jurassic tropics generated enormous convective weather systems, towering cumulonimbus clouds building over the warm sea surface and releasing rain in short torrential bursts before dissipating again into the hazy blue sky. Between storms, the sea surface was typically calm and glassy, reflecting the bleached sky above in sheets of silver that were interrupted periodically by the surfacing of large marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs leaping partially clear of the water in the fashion of modern dolphins, long-necked plesiosaurs raising their small heads just above the surface to breathe, and, occasionally, the broad dark back of Liopleurodon itself surfacing slowly, rolling slightly, drawing a single long breath before submerging again without any visible effort, as though the boundary between air and water were merely a suggestion it was choosing to honor on this particular occasion. The sound of the Jurassic Sea is something that no human has ever heard, and yet something that the bones of the earth remember. There are no breaking waves on distant shores, not here in the middle of the epicontinental sea, where the nearest landmass is 100 kilometers away and the water is too shallow for deep ocean swell. There is only the soft, continuous lap and surge of the surface, the low, resonant thrumming of the crinoid forests in the current, the distant, occasional pressure wave of a large animal moving fast through open water. It is not a silence exactly. It is something more profound than silence. It is the sound of a world operating at full biological capacity. Every niche occupied, every resource consumed and recycled and consumed again. The vast metabolic machinery of a Jurassic ocean running at peak efficiency. And somewhere in the depths of this world, somewhere below the fish shoals, somewhere below the Pliosaurs and the ichthyosaurs, somewhere in the blue dark intermediate water between the sunlit reef zone and the anoxic basin floor, Liopleurodon is moving. It moves in long, slow sweeps of its great flippers, covering ground that a human swimmer would need an hour to cross in minutes, the water parting around its barrel chest and closing behind its narrowing tail with a fluid silence that belies the enormous muscular effort involved. It is not in any visible hurry. It is simply present, fully, inescapably present, in this world, in this water, in this particular configuration of life that has taken 160 million years to reach this precise and extraordinary moment. Its eyes, set on the sides of its skull and capable of detecting movement in the dimly lit water below the thermocline, sweep slowly from side to side as it cruises. Its nostrils sample the water continuously, a chemical symphony of metabolic byproducts, reproductive hormones, stress compounds released by fish in the upper water column. The faint trail of a large ichthyosaur that passed through this zone approximately 20 minutes ago, moving east. The information is processed, not in any conscious, deliberate way that we would recognize as thought, but in the rapid, automatic, extraordinarily refined way of an animal whose ancestors have been solving these exact sensory equations for 50 million years. And the trajectory adjusts. Slightly. Incrementally. Pointed now toward the northeast, where the ichthyosaur's trail grows fresher and the chemical signal of fish blood from a recent feeding event adds a new frequency to the olfactory cord. There is no hurry. There is only the deep, inexorable momentum of an apex predator doing what 160 million years of evolution designed it to do. The Tethys is its home. The Tethys is its inheritance. The Tethys is, in every sense that matters in the Jurassic, the entire world. When the sun drops below the horizon, and in the Jurassic tropics, the transition from full sunlight to complete darkness happens quickly in the span of perhaps 30 minutes, with none of the long, lingering dusk of higher latitudes. The character of the Tethys changes in ways that are profound and immediate. The bioluminescence begins. It does not build gradually. It ignites as the last light fades in a sudden, all-encompassing display that has no parallel in any human experience of the sea. Every wave crest glows with a cold blue-white light. The product of billions of dinoflagellates, microscopic photosynthetic organisms whose bioluminescent response to mechanical disturbance turns every movement in the dark water into a brief, brilliant flash. The bow wave of a surfacing ichthyosaur is a streak of cold fire across the black water. The passage of a large fish school through the surface layer leaves a glowing trail that persists for minutes, slowly fading as the organisms recover from their chemical light reaction. And in the deep water, below the surface bioluminescence, the midwater animals that spend the day in the dark and migrate up toward the surface at night carry their own lights. The pinpoints and shifting patterns of deep-sea organisms whose bioluminescence serves a dozen different biological functions. Attracting mates, luring prey, warning predators, communicating across the soundless dark. The Jurassic night ocean is a world of light in darkness, an inversion of the daytime order. The animals that were invisible in the blue-green daylight become their own illuminations. The long trailing tentacles of siphonophores, colonial animals that string their specialized zoids in chains many meters long through the open water, glow with a diffuse, shifting bioluminescence that is sometimes approached cautiously by the creatures of the deep, mistaking their light for the scattered glow of a prey school. Large ammonites rising toward the surface on the night migration that many of them undertake trail brief flashes of greenish light as the water moves over their shells. And somewhere in the mid-water, below all of this, Liopleurodon moves through the bioluminescent display with the same calm, purposeful efficiency that characterizes all its movements, its enormous eyes now more valuable than ever, reading the light patterns in the dark water for the information they carry. The school of fish betrayed by the bioluminescent trail it leaves, the ammonite rising on its night migration, the Ophthalmosaurus whose surfacing has set the water above it flickering with cold fire. This is the world at its most ancient. This is the Tethys at its most itself, dark, lit from within, alive with a biological complexity that has been building for millions of years and will continue building for millions more, entirely unconcerned with the passage of time in any human sense of the word. The night passes, the stars, different stars, in different positions, because the Earth's axial orientation has not yet arrived at the precise alignment that maps our constellations, wheel overhead in slow, ancient patterns. The air temperature barely drops. There is not enough land nearby to allow significant nocturnal cooling over the open sea. The water is exactly as warm at 3 in the morning as it was at 3 in the afternoon. Only the light has changed. Only the distribution of life in the water column has shifted as the night migrators rise and the daytime surface species sink into their nocturnal stillness. And it is beautiful. If you can set aside the instinctive fear that a 200-kilogram carnivore with a jaw the length of your arm naturally inspires, it is purely, heartbreakingly beautiful. This ancient sea, this ancient light, this ancient predator moving through the warm water of a world that has long since dissolved into geological memory. Let yourself rest in that beauty for a moment. Let the water settle around you. Let the light filter down. And now, here, at the edge of everything we know, we have stood in the Jurassic. We have felt the weight of that ancient water. We have watched Liopleurodon ferox move through a world that is utterly, fundamentally gone. We have counted the facts, the 158 million years, the 170 meters of vanished sea level, the 1,950 parts per million of carbon dioxide in an atmosphere that no living human has breathed. We have tried, with the limited tools of language and imagination, to hold in our minds the full, magnificent, impossible reality of that vanished world. And now we ask the question that is the heart of this entire journey. What if it never ended? Not the Jurassic itself. That period was always going to evolve into something else. Not the specific configuration of continents and oceans which tectonics guaranteed would continue to shift and change. But the lineage, the predatory lineage that produced Liopleurodon. The evolutionary sequence that had spent, by the time of Liopleurodon's peak, more than 50 million years refining a single extraordinary idea. A large-bodied, four-flippered marine predator with a disproportionately large skull, powerful jaws, and the sensory sophistication to hunt anything, anywhere, in an open ocean. What if that lineage had not ended? This is not, on its surface, an impossible question. The Pliosaur lineage as a whole did survive well beyond Liopleurodon. The Cretaceous seas were home to enormous pliosaurs, Kronosaurus queenslandicus in the warm seas around what would become Australia, reaching an estimated 9 to 10 meters in length. Brachiochenius lucasi in the western interior seaway of North America, And, most impressively, Pliosaurus funki in the Arctic seas, an animal that may have reached 12 to 15 meters, with a skull alone measuring nearly 2.4 meters. These Cretaceous pliosaurs were not Liopleurodon. They were different genera, different species, products of their own evolutionary trajectories. But they carried forward the same fundamental body plan, the same ecological role, the same essential idea that Liopleurodon had helped to perfect in the Jurassic. The last known pliosaurs disappear from the fossil record approximately 89 million years ago, but during the Turonian stage of the late Cretaceous. This was a period of significant environmental upheaval in the marine realm, the global anoxic event known as OAE2, a massive expansion of ocean dead zones driven by volcanic activity associated with the formation of the Caribbean Large Igneous Province, disrupted marine food chains across much of the world's oceans. The largest, most energy-hungry apex predators would have been disproportionately affected by such a disruption. They depended on a deep, highly productive food chain beneath them, and when that chain was disrupted, they could not simply eat less. They required enormous quantities of prey to sustain their metabolic demands. But here is where the question becomes interesting. The seas did not remain disrupted. The Cretaceous marine realm recovered. The food chains rebuilt themselves. The western interior seaway of North America, for example, remained a productive, diverse, warm marine environment right up to the end of the Cretaceous 66 million years ago, hosting an extraordinary diversity of large marine predators, mosasaurs, sharks, large fish, marine birds. And yet no pliosaurs returned to fill the apex predator role in those recovered seas. The niche was taken, instead, by mosasaurs, a different group of marine reptiles, convergently similar in some ways to pliosaurs, but fundamentally distinct in their evolutionary origins and body plan. Why did the pliosaurs not recover? We do not fully know. The fossil record of marine reptiles from the late Cretaceous is incomplete in ways that make definitive statements dangerous. There may have been small, ecryptic pliosaur lineages persisting in environments where fossilization was unlikely. Deep open ocean settings, for example, where the preservation potential for large vertebrates is extremely low. Some researchers have cautiously suggested that the apparent extinction of pliosaurs at the Turonian boundary may reflect a gap in the fossil record as much as a genuine biological event. The evidence is not conclusive in either direction, and so the question remains open. Tantalizingly, frustratingly, magnificently open. What if a pliosaur lineage, descended from Liopleurodon or from one of its relatives, had survived the disruptions of the Cretaceous? What if a small, scattered, ecologically flexible population had clung to existence through the anoxic crises and the sea level changes and the slow transformation of the Tethys from a vast tropical ocean to a closing, fragmenting seaway? What would have happened to them at 66 million years ago when the asteroid struck and the world was reorganized from its foundations? What would they have eaten in the cold, dark, productive aftermath of the impact winter? How would they have changed? And what might the lineage look like today, 160 million years after Liopleurodon first slid through the warm, shallow water of the Jurassic Tethys? These are the questions that will carry us forward from here. Layered, intricate, leading from one to the next in a chain that stretches from the warm Jurassic Sea all the way to the present moment, to the world as it is now, into the oceans that still exist, still move, still contain within their darkest, least explored depths more mystery than the entire surface of the Earth. Step forward with us. The story is only just beginning to unfold. But here is where the story gets truly strange. Because the question of whether large marine reptiles could have survived the great extinction events of the Mesozoic is not entirely theoretical. It is not a pure thought experiment constructed from nothing. There is evidence, fragmentary, contested, deeply debated in the scientific literature, but evidence nonetheless, that some marine reptile lineages survived far longer than the standard fossil record narrative would suggest. Consider this. The mosasaurs, which represent a separate lineage of marine reptiles from the pliosaurs, were believed for most of the 20th century to have gone completely extinct at the Kare-Pai boundary 66 million years ago. And indeed, no post-Cretaceous mosasaur fossils have been found. But the survival story of the marine crocodilians is more complicated. Metriorhynchus and its relatives, those armored, shark-tailed marine crocodilians that shared the Jurassic Tethys with Liopleurodon, did not survive to the end of the Cretaceous, but their terrestrial cousins did. And the question of how and why some reptile lineages developed the capacity to survive catastrophic environmental change while others did not is one of the genuinely deep, unresolved puzzles of vertebrate paleobiology. Here is the truly strange part. The oceans are very large, and we have explored very little of them. But the deep ocean, everything below approximately 200 meters, covers roughly 65% of the Earth's surface. Of this vast area, less than 20% has been mapped with any precision, and far less than 1% has been directly observed by submersibles or remotely operated vehicles. The abyssal plains, the deep trenches, the vast mid-ocean ridges with their hydrothermal vent systems, these regions remain, in any practical sense, as unexplored as the surface of another planet. In 1976, a specimen of megamouth shark, Megachasma pelagios, was accidentally caught off the coast of Hawaii. This was a species of shark over 5 meters in length, with a distinctive large mouth and specialized filter-feeding biology, previously completely unknown to science. In 1938, a coelacanth, a fish belonging to a lineage believed to have been extinct since the end of the Cretaceous, was caught alive off the coast of South Africa. The living coelacanth, Latimeria shalumnae, was described as a living fossil, an animal whose basic body plan had persisted virtually unchanged for over 400 million years. These are not isolated curiosities. They are reminders, sharp, vivid, humbling reminders that the ocean keeps its secrets with a proficiency that exceeds our most sophisticated search efforts. Which means this: if a lineage descended from pliosaurs, no smaller than Liopleurodon, perhaps deep ocean adapted, perhaps ecologically flexible in ways the giant forms were not, had persisted in the deep ocean, in the open pelagic zone, in the cold, reproductive waters of the Southern Ocean or the deep passages of the North Atlantic, we might not know about it. We might genuinely not know. This thought is not meant to frighten. It is not offered as evidence of anything lurking malevolently in the deep. It is offered as something much more nourishing than fear. It is offered as wonder. As the quiet, persistent, deeply satisfying awareness that this planet is far larger and far older and far more full of possibility than any single moment of human attention can encompass. The ancient world did not simply stop, it transformed. And some of what it was, some of what lived and breathed and moved through its ancient waters may still be here, in forms we have not yet imagined, waiting in the deep. If this story is carrying you somewhere peaceful, feel free to close your eyes. The narration will guide you, and so we step into the territory of the possible, not the certain, not the proven, but the rigorously imagined, a thought experiment built on real science, real evolutionary biology, real oceanographic data, and a genuine, careful respect for what deep time can do to a lineage, a body plan, an idea. We begin at the moment when Liopleurodon's known lineage ends, approximately 155 million years ago, and we ask, what if a small, ecologically flexible population had survived? Not the giants, not the 11-meter, barrel-chested, ocean-dominating apex predators of the Jurassic peak. Those animals were too large, too metabolically demanding, too dependent on the extraordinarily productive, shallow-water ecosystem of the Jurassic epicontinental seas. When those seas began to regress, Either giants would have been the first to go. Too much body to sustain in a contracting, cooling, deepening world. But smaller individuals, animals in the 4 to 6 meter range, juveniles or adult representatives of a smaller subpopulation, might have had more options. They required less food, they were more maneuverable in deeper water, and the Tethys in the late Jurassic, while beginning to change, was still a vast, productive ocean system, still capable of sustaining a diverse community of large predators in its deeper, more stable zones. Let us follow one such population forward through time, approximately 155 million years ago, the late Jurassic. The European epicontinental seas are contracting. Sea levels have dropped perhaps 30 meters from their Colovian peak, and the broad, shallow platforms that once covered southern England and northern France are increasingly exposed as low, swampy coastal plains dotted with small lakes and river systems that drain the emerging limestone highlands. The reef systems are diminishing as the water depth decreases and the circulation of warm, nutrient-rich water is disrupted. The great fish shoals are still present, but less dense. The diversity of prey species is declining. In this changing world, our hypothetical survivor population of small pliosaurs has shifted its range. Rather than the warm, shallow epicontinental platform, they now spend most of their time in the deeper water at the margin of the shelf, the zone between 100 and 400 meters depth, where the water is cooler, darker, but still productive. The food resource here is different: fewer surface fish, the more mid-water squid, more deep-ranging ichthyosaurs, whose dives into the mesopelagic zone bring them through the depth range our survivors now occupy. The teeth of this population are subtly changing across generations. The large, conical, gripping teeth that were ideal for securing a struggling ichthyosaur are gradually being supplemented in the most successful individuals by slightly more numerous, slightly more slender teeth, better for securing the fast, slippery squid that are becoming an increasingly important part of the diet. Evolution does not plan, it does not anticipate, but it does respond. 10,000 years later, and the population has adapted measurably to its new depth range. Body size has decreased slightly. The average adult is now closer to 4.5 meters rather than 6, a function of the lower prey availability in the mesopelagic zone compared to the shallow shelf. The flippers have undergone a subtle refinement, slightly longer relative to body length, with a more flexible leading edge that allows more precise maneuvering in the three-dimensional complexity of mid-water hunting. The eyes have increased slightly in diameter relative to skull length. The deeper water, with its perpetual twilight, rewards better light-gathering capacity. This is not dramatic change. It is not the stuff of a single generation, or 100 generations, or even 1,000 generations. It is the patient, incremental refinement of a body plan that is fundamentally sound. We're working through millions of small adjustments across hundreds of thousands of individuals, generation by generation, in response to a world that is slowly, inexorably becoming different. And so we move forward. 50 million years forward to the end of the Cretaceous period. 66 million years ago, the KP boundary. The asteroid is real. Its effects are documented and quantified with extraordinary precision. It struck the Yucatan Peninsula with an energy equivalent to approximately 1 billion Hiroshima bombs, excavating a crater 180 kilometers in diameter in a matter of seconds and releasing a global cascade of thermal pulses, seismic waves, mega tsunamis, and, most critically for the long-term survival of life, an enormous quantity of sulfur dioxide and other aerosols into the stratosphere. With these aerosols reflected sunlight back into space for a period of approximately 2 to 5 years, dropping global surface temperatures by an estimated 10 to 20 degrees Celsius and reducing photosynthetically active radiation at the ocean surface to near zero for periods of months at a time. The surface ocean collapsed. Photosynthesis, the foundation of the marine food chain, was effectively shut down in the sunlit zone for long enough to devastate the plankton communities that supported everything above them. Fish that fed on plankton starved. Animals that fed on fish starved. The cascade moved up the food chain with terrifying efficiency. But here is what is critical for our thought experiment. The deep ocean was not immediately or equally affected. The deep ocean communities, those living below the sunlit zone, i.e. in the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones, were not primarily dependent on fresh photosynthetic production. They were dependent on the rain of organic material sinking from above, dead plankton, fish carcasses, fecal pellets, a flux of energy that, while diminished by the collapse of the surface, was not immediately zeroed out. In the months and years after the impact, an enormous quantity of dead organic material from the devastated surface ocean sank into the deep, a brief but significant pulse of energy that deep-sea organisms and midwater predators could exploit. Our hypothetical pliosaur survivors, already adapted to the mesopelagic zone, already comfortable in darker, cooler water, already relying more on squid and midwater fish than on the surface-dependent prey of their Jurassic ancestors, would have found the immediate post-impact period extremely challenging, but not necessarily immediately fatal. The pulse of sinking organic material and the mass die-off of surface-dependent fish species would have created opportunities even as it eliminated others. This would mean that survivorship through the KPG boundary was not an impossibility for a mesopelagic, deep-adapted pliosaur lineage. Not a certainty, by any means not a certainty, but not an impossibility. A small, scattered, highly adaptable population in the deep ocean has genuine survival potential through events that would have annihilated a shallow-water, high-energy demand apex predator. 5 million years later, the early Paleogene, the world has been fundamentally reorganized. The non-avian dinosaurs are gone, the pterosaurs are gone, the mosasaurs are gone. The large marine ichthyosaurs had already disappeared from the record several million years before the KPG boundary, their role in the food chain still unexplained. The pliosaurs, the long-necked forms, also appeared to disappear at the KPG boundary, though recent work has produced tantalizingly ambiguous evidence from the Maastrichtian stage. In the oceans, the recovery of the marine food chain is gradual and uneven. The earliest Paleocene seas are dominated by small, opportunistic organisms, the survivors and their immediate descendants, rapidly diversifying to fill the ecological vacuums left by the mass extinction. Within roughly 5 million years of the impact, new communities of fish and squid and sharks are establishing themselves in a warming, recovering ocean. Our hypothetical pliosaur survivors, if they had made it through the boundary, now find themselves in a changed but, critically, less competitively crowded ocean. The mosasaurs, which had been their most significant ecological competitors in the late Cretaceous, are gone. The large ichthyosaurs are gone. The ecological niche of large marine reptile predator, a niche that has been occupied continuously for nearly 200 million years, is suddenly strikingly empty. Evolution does not tolerate empty niches for long, but the organisms that fill them are shaped by what is available, not by what was there before. Our surviving pliosaur lineage, in this scenario, does not simply expand back into the apex predator role of its Jurassic ancestors. It cannot. The ocean is different now, colder in the higher latitudes, stratified differently with different prey communities. 1. The Tethys itself is beginning its long, slow process of closure as the African and Indian plates move north and the great equatorial seaway that defined the Mesozoic marine world begins to narrow. The survivors must adapt to a more dynamic, more climatically variable world than their ancestors knew. Over the next 20 million years, spanning the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, the lineage diversifies and experiments. In the warm, shallow seas of the early Eocene, where global temperatures reached their Cenozoic maximum, in an event known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, approximately 56 million years ago, a period when sea surface temperatures in the tropics may have reached 35 degrees Celsius and the Arctic Ocean was warm enough to support crocodilians. Some members of the lineage return to larger body sizes and shallower water. The prey is there. The early Eocene seas were extraordinarily productive, full of large, diverse fish communities, including the first relatives of modern tuna and other highly mobile open ocean species. These shallow-water, warm-adapted forms represent one branch of the diverging lineage. Animals perhaps 6 to 8 meters in length, hunting the warm tropical seas of what is rapidly becoming the Atlantic Ocean as the gap between South America and Africa continues to widen. But another branch takes a different path. In the higher latitudes, where the recovering ocean is cooler and deeper and more productive in terms of raw biomass, though less diverse in species, a second lineage of our hypothetical survivors is adapting to the cold. The cold water branch is smaller. We're on average around 3 to 4 meters, and its body plan is shifting in directions that would have been recognizable to a paleontologist familiar with the Pliosaur group, but increasingly distinct from the Jurassic prototype. The neck is slightly longer, not long, nothing like the long-necked Pliosaurs, but longer than Liopleurodons, improving the range of the head relative to the body and making certain feeding strategies more effective. The skull is slightly narrower, the teeth more numerous and less massive, better adapted for a diet dominated by schooling fish rather than the large individual prey items that Liopleurodon's bone-crushing jaws were designed to handle. This is how evolution works across geological time. Not through single dramatic transformations, but through the patient accumulation of small changes, each one a fractional improvement in fit between organism and environment, each one retained by the differential survival of those individuals in whom the change is expressed most effectively. 30 million years later, approximately 25 million years ago, the Oligocene epoch. The world is colder now. The slow geological process of Antarctic glaciation, which had begun in earnest around 34 million years ago as the Drake Passage between Antarctica and South America opened and established the Antarctic circumpolar current, has been steadily removing heat from the Southern Ocean and creating a stable, permanent cold reservoir at the Earth's southern pole. Global temperatures have dropped significantly from their Eocene peak. The shallow tropical seas that covered much of the early Eocene world have retreated as sea levels fell with the growth of the Antarctic ice sheet. The Tethys, that great warm equatorial ocean of the Mesozoic, has been reduced to a fraction of its former self, now represented primarily by the Paratethys, a large, partially enclosed inland sea stretching across Central Asia, and the early Mediterranean basin, still open to both the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean, but drastically reduced in area compared to its Jurassic predecessor. This would mean, for our hypothetical lineage, a world of contracting habitat in the low latitudes and expanding opportunity in the high latitudes, where the cold, productive upwelling zones of the developing Southern Ocean are generating some of the highest marine biological productivity on Earth. In this world, the cold-adapted branch of our lineage would be thriving. The Southern Ocean is, in many respects, the ecological successor to the Tethys, vast, productive, full of large prey species and largely unexploited by the new large marine predators that are beginning to diversify in the warmer waters further north. The early ancestors of modern whales, the archaeocetes, are now well established and diversifying rapidly. And while they would increasingly occupy the large predator niches of the open ocean, the mesopelagic zone, the twilight water column between 200 and 1,000 meters depth, remains a domain where our hypothetical pliosaur descendants would still have significant advantages, particularly in the higher latitudes where the cold, the poorly lit water conditions would have been most similar to those in which their deep-adapted ancestors survived the KPG. We move forward again. Another 15 million years, the Miocene epoch, approximately 10 million years ago. By this point, the world is recognizably closer to the one we know. The continents are largely in their modern positions. The Atlantic Ocean is wide and deep. The Mediterranean, the final remnant of the Tethys, has been intermittently cut off from the Atlantic Ocean since approximately 6 million years ago, in an event known as the Messinian salinity crisis, when the evaporation of the isolated Mediterranean left behind enormous salt deposits before the sea was reflooded through what is now the Strait of Gibraltar approximately 5.3 million years ago. The Pacific Ocean is the largest on Earth. The Southern Ocean is cold, productive, and permanently ice-fringed. In this world, our hypothetical lineage has had 90 million years since the KPG boundary to adapt, diverge, and specialize. Several distinct forms might have emerged. In the Southern Ocean, the cold-adapted descendants have reached a stable size range of approximately 4 to 5 meters, large enough to be effective predators of the abundant Antarctic fish species, such as the early relatives of Disostachus eleginoides, the modern Patagonian toothfish, and the diverse Antarctic cod family, but not so large as to create impossible metabolic demands in the cold, seasonally variable Southern Ocean environment. While these animals would be physiologically unlike their Jurassic ancestors in important ways, they would almost certainly have developed some degree of endothermy, metabolic heat production, to maintain their body temperature in water that averages between -1 and +4 degrees Celsius. This is not a radical evolutionary development. Several modern fish lineages, including tunas and some sharks, have independently evolved regional endothermy, and the energetic advantages in a cold water predatory context are well established. In the warm Atlantic and Indo-Pacific, the larger, shallow water descendants of the warm-adapted branch would have undergone a different set of pressures. By the Miocene, the oceans were full of sophisticated, highly mobile, cognitively complex predators: the toothed whales, the great sharks, the fast, large tunas. Competition for large prey items in the open ocean would have been intense. In this competitive environment, the warm water pliosaur descendants might have specialized, moving toward ambush strategies in complex reef and seamount environments, or toward cooperative hunting of large prey, or toward niche partitioning based on depth or prey type. Over the next 10 million years, through the Miocene and Pliocene and into the Pleistocene, the story would become increasingly shaped by the growing influence of glacial cycles. The great ice ages of the Pleistocene, with their repeated expansion and contraction of ice sheets over 100,000-year cycles, created enormous fluctuations in sea level, temperature, and ocean circulation, are repeatedly disrupting and reorganizing marine ecosystems in ways that would have put great pressure on any large, long-lived, slowly reproducing marine predator lineage. And yet, large, long-lived, slowly reproducing marine predators did survive through the Pleistocene. Whales did, large sharks did, sea turtles did. The survival toolkit for these groups included large body size, which buffers against short-term food availability fluctuations, wide geographic range, which buffers against regional habitat loss, and slow life history strategies, which, while making recovery from population crashes difficult, also mean that individuals live long enough to outlast most medium-term environmental disruptions. If our hypothetical pliosaur descendants had acquired similar life history characteristics as the largest modern marine predators have done, then survival through the Pleistocene is not inherently more difficult for them than it would be for any other similarly adapted large marine predator. And this would mean that as we approach the present, as the geological clock ticks through the last 10,000 years of the Holocene, through the remarkable stability and warmth of the current interglacial period, our hypothetical lineage might still be here, changed, certainly, unrecognizable in many external details from the Jurassic original, but present, deep in the ocean, moving through water that is still, in its fundamental chemistry and mechanics and ecology, The same water that Liopleurodon moved through 160 million years ago. The ocean does not forget. It transforms. It reorganizes. But the deep movements, the ancient currents, the pressure waves, the chemical gradients, the slow conveyor of deep water circulation that has been running, in some form, since before the Jurassic, these are continuous. These are the same. And if something is moving through that water now, something large, something old, something shaped by 160 million years of continuous evolutionary refinement in the ocean's deepest and most persistent environments, it would carry within its body, in the architecture of its flippers and the chemistry of its senses and the slow rhythm of its ancient heart, the deep memory of the Tethys. The deep memory of Liopleurodon. The story does not end there. It was because the question of what such an animal might look like today and what the world would look like around it is the most beautiful part of this journey. And it is the part that lies ahead of us, waiting in the gentle dark beyond the next turning of this narrative. But take a breath first. Feel the weight of all that time. 160 million years is not a number that the human mind was designed to comprehend. It is longer than the entire history of flowering plants on this planet. It is longer than the period of time that separates the last dinosaurs from the first mammals. It is a duration so vast that the continents have moved thousands of kilometers during its span, that entire oceans have opened and closed, that the atmosphere has been chemically transformed multiple times. And in all of that time, in all of those 160 million years of shifting continents and changing seas and rising and falling temperatures, the idea of the ocean predator has persisted. Not always in the form of Liopleurodon, not always in the form of any particular animal, but in the idea, in the function, in the niche that says, here, in the blue dark middle water, there is a large animal with a powerful jaw and precise senses and the patient endurance to cross an ocean in search of a meal. That idea is not going anywhere. It is as old as the sea itself. Imagine the world as it might be, not the world as it is, with its noisy, luminous surface full of human activity and satellite-tracked data and sonar surveys and container shipping lanes. Set all of that aside. We like setting down something very heavy that you did not realize you were carrying. Imagine, instead, the ocean. The deep ocean. The part that most human beings will never see. The part that exists in a perpetual, absolute darkness that no sunlight has reached in 1 billion years, where the pressure is 600 times greater than at the surface, where the temperature stabilizes at approximately 2 degrees Celsius, regardless of the season or the weather at the surface thousands of meters above. The part that is, in every meaningful sense, the most isolated and least understood environment on the surface of this planet. In this ocean, in the fathomless blue-black of the mesopelagic and bathopelagic zones, imagine something moving. It is not enormous. Not in the way that Liopleurodon was enormous. Not that 11-meter barrel-chested apex predator of the Jurassic shallows. This is a different animal, shaped by 160 million years of deep water adaptation, metabolic refinement, and the patient pressure of cold, dark, nutrient-limited environments. It is perhaps 4 meters in length, perhaps 4.5, compact and hydrodynamic, with a barrel-shaped body that echoes its ancient ancestor in its fundamental proportions but is subtly, profoundly different in its details. The flippers are longer now, relative to body length, more wing-like than paddle-like, generating thrust with an efficiency that approaches that of the albatross wing. That extraordinary biological solution to the problem of covering vast distances with minimal energy expenditure. The body surface is smooth and scaleless, a dark blue-gray on the dorsal surface and a pale, almost bioluminescent cream on the ventral surface. Countershading, the ancient, elegant solution to invisibility in a water column illuminated from above. The head is slightly larger relative to body length than in Liopleurodon, not dramatically, but enough to accommodate the enlarged olfactory and auditory processing centers that deep water hunting requires. The eyes are enormous, filling much of the lateral face, deep adapted, maximizing light capture in the perpetual twilight of the mesopelagic zone, capable of detecting the faint bioluminescence of squid and fish at ranges of 30 or 40 meters in water that contains not one photon of sunlight. Call this animal Neopleurodon pelagicus, the new smooth-toothed ocean dweller, the deep-sea inheritor of Liopleurodon's ancient lineage. This is not a real taxonomy. It is a name given to an imagined animal, a placeholder for the idea of what might have been, what might still be in the undiscovered depths of the world's oceans. Neopleurodon pelagicus moves through the deep water at approximately 400 meters depth in the heart of the oxygen minimum zone, that layer of the water column where the decomposition of sinking organic material has stripped most of the dissolved oxygen from the water, creating a zone inhospitable to most aerobic organisms and therefore patrolled primarily by specialized, deep-adapted animals with highly efficient metabolisms. In this zone, there are fewer competitors, there is less noise, the water is very still, very dark, very old. Neopleurodon breathes air. It must. No descendant of the air-breathing Jurassic pliosaurs could have evolved to extract oxygen from water. That pathway was not available in the pliosaur body plan, and 160 million years of evolution, while capable of extraordinary transformation, cannot redesign the fundamental biochemistry of an animal's respiratory system. So Neopleurodon dives from the surface, drawing a single long breath in the cold night air before descending into the dark. Its dive depth, supported by a highly efficient oxygen storage system in its blood and muscles, myoglobin-rich, dark muscle tissue, analogous to that of modern deep-diving beaked whales, allows it to remain submerged for perhaps 90 minutes before the rising carbon dioxide in its blood triggers the physiological imperative to surface. In 90 minutes, at a sustained cruising depth of 400 meters, Neopleurodon can cover approximately 15 kilometers of horizontal distance while simultaneously sweeping through several hundred meters of vertical range in the water column. It hunts in spiraling arcs, descending through the mesopelagic zone in a long glide that requires almost no muscular effort, the density differential between its air-filled lungs and the surrounding water providing the negative buoyancy that pulls it gently downward, and then ascending in a slow, powerful flutter of those long, wing-like flippers, sweeping the water column like a great dark wing in absolute silence. It is in this ascending sweep that it most often finds its prey. Architeuthis ducks, the giant squid, an animal that reaches up to 13 meters in total length and inhabits the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones of the world's temperate and polar oceans, is the primary prey item of Neopleurodon in the cooler waters of the North Atlantic and Southern Ocean. The giant squid is not easy prey. It is fast, intelligent by invertebrate standards, and equipped with suckers lined with sharp, rigid rings that can lacerate any predator that does not secure a clean, immediate grip. The scars left by giant squid sucker rings on the bodies of sperm whales, the only known natural predator of giant squid in the modern ocean, are testimony to the violence of these encounters even when the predator wins. Neopleurodon approaches its prey not with the direct frontal assault of its Jurassic ancestor, but with the slow, spiraling, three-dimensional stalk of a deep-adapted predator that has learned, across 10 million generations, that patience and precision are more valuable in the deep ocean than raw speed and force. It detects the squid chemically first, the distinctive amino acid profile of cephalopod metabolic waste, a faint but identifiable thread in the water column, and then visually as the squid's own bioluminescence betrays its position in the dark water. The final approach is from below, coming up through the squid's blind spot in a slow arc that positions Neopleurodon directly beneath its prey before the lunging strike, A rapid, powerful extension of the neck combined with a sharp acceleration of the whole body, closing the last 2 meters in a fraction of a second. The jaws are smaller than those of Liopleurodon, still formidable. These still lined with conical, gripping teeth, but more numerous and more slender, designed for securing the soft, strong body of a squid rather than the dense, bone-armored body of a large fish or marine reptile. The bite is precise, targeted at the mantle, the muscular body mass of the squid, immediately disabling the prey's ability to jet away and reducing the risk of injury from the thrashing arms and their ring-lined suckers. In the darkness of the mesopelagic zone, 400 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic, Neopleurodon pelagicus feeds. And then it rests, drifting slowly upward on the positive buoyancy of its partly emptied lungs, rising toward the surface in a long, dreamlike ascent through layers of water that grow gradually warmer and lighter as the faintest traces of diffused sunlight begin to filter down from above. For the surface, when it arrives, is a different world entirely. The North Atlantic at night is a vast, dark, restless plain, its surface chopped by the wind into small, persistent waves that catch and scatter the light of the stars. In winter, the air temperature may be close to freezing, a sharp, salt-heavy cold that is nothing like the warm, dense, moisture-saturated air of the Jurassic Tethys. Neopleurodon surfaces quietly, extending its nostrils above the waterline with the minimal possible disturbance to the surface, drawing a series of rapid, deep breaths. Its body is barely visible in the darkness. Only the slight phosphorescent disturbance of its bow wave and the faint, warm vapor of its exhalation against the cold night air might betray its presence to any observer on the surface. But there are no observers. The North Atlantic in this imagined present is, at the latitudes where Neopleurodon spends its cold season months, largely empty of human traffic. No container ships in this imagined world. No fishing vessels trailing kilometer-long lines through the mesopelagic zone. The sea is as it was before, immense, dark, and patient. Imagine the Mediterranean now, that warm, enclosed, relatively shallow sea that is the final geographical remnant of the ancient Tethys, the sea that was once the central artery of the most biologically productive ocean system the world has known. In the warm months, a second form of our hypothetical lineage, the warm water, shallower adapted branch, moves through the deeper basins of the Mediterranean at depths of between 200 and 600 meters. This Mediterranean form, which we might imagine as slightly smaller, perhaps 3.5 meters, and more slenderly built than the North Atlantic deep water form, occupies a different ecological role in a different ecosystem. The Mediterranean is warmer. Surface temperatures reach 27 to 28 degrees Celsius in summer in the eastern basin, but it is also deeper in its central parts, with the Ionian Sea reaching depths of over 5,100 meters in its deepest point. It is a sea of strong contrasts, a warm, nutrient-poor surface layer and a cold, denser, more productive deep layer, separated by a sharp thermocline. The Mediterranean form of Neopleurodon, call it Neopleurodon tethysensis, the Tethys inheritor, is, in this imagined scenario, a remnant population, ecologically restricted, genetically isolated from the larger Atlantic populations by the narrow, shallow passage of the Strait of Gibraltar. It hunts the deep-water fish of the Mediterranean basin, Aphanopus carbo, the black scabbard fish, the deep-water groupers and snappers that inhabit the rocky submarine cliffs at 300 to 400 meters depth. The occasional deep-diving loggerhead sea turtle, Caretta caretta, taken in the upper part of its range where the two species' depth distributions overlap. Neopleurodon tethysensis is not unaware of the human world above it. The Mediterranean, even in this imagined scenario, carries faint traces of the centuries of maritime activity on its surface, the chemical signatures of fuel combustion, of agricultural runoff, of the altered nitrogen and phosphorus ratios of a sea surrounded by millions of human beings. These chemical traces filtered down through the water column in ways that are faint but detectable, and they have shaped the Mediterranean form's behavior in small but significant ways. It is more cautious near the surface than its Atlantic relative. It avoids the well-lit, well-trafficked upper water column during daylight hours. It surfaces only at night and never within detectable range of boat traffic. It has, in this imagined world, learned to be invisible. And so, in the warm darkness of a Mediterranean summer night, somewhere in the deep water between the Balearic Islands and the coast of Sardinia, Neopleurodon tethysensis surfaces in the quiet black water, breathes in the salt warm air, and dives again, descending through the thermocline into the cold, dark, productive deep. The cold, dark, productive deep, that is, in its fundamental nature, the most direct geographical and ecological descendant of the ancient Tethys, in which Liopleurodon ferox first opened its eyes 160 million years ago. The Tethys has not entirely disappeared, it has changed beyond recognition. It has shrunk and fragmented and been overwritten by the collision of continents and the rise of mountain ranges and the rerouting of ocean currents. But in the deepest, coldest, most isolated basins of what is now the Mediterranean and the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, the remnant basins of a vanished ocean, something of the Tethys persists. The water chemistry, the sediment record, the deep, slow circulation patterns shaped by the same geological basin geometry that shaped the ancient sea. The Tethys is not gone, it is merely resting. Compressed into a smaller volume, but concentrated into a deeper darkness. And in the imagined world where Liopleurodon's lineage survived, the last representatives of the Tethys predator lineage rest in that same darkness, breathing the same compressed remnant of an ancient sea. There is something deeply calming about this image, something that speaks to the persistence of the world beneath its surfaces. The Mediterranean that millions of people swim in every summer, that warm, blue, familiar sea, contains within its deep basins a darkness and a cold that are continuous with the ancient world, unchanged in their fundamental character across millions of years. You are never as far from the ancient world as you think. In the Southern Ocean, a third population, the largest and most robust of our imagined lineage, adapted to the cold, productive, endlessly moving waters of the circumpolar current, moves in long, steady migratory loops around the continent of Antarctica. This Southern Ocean form, Neopleurodon australis, if we are still naming things, is the most physically imposing of the surviving lineage, regularly reaching 5 meters or slightly beyond, with a powerful muscular body optimized for sustained swimming in the strong persistent currents of the Drake Passage and the circumpolar front. It has the darkest coloration of the three forms, nearly black on the dorsal surface, a camouflage developed over millions of generations of hunting in the perpetual low-light conditions of high-latitude deep water, and the largest eyes of any member of the lineage, a full 18 centimeters in diameter, capable of detecting the faint bioluminescent glow of Antarctic krill swarms and myctophid fish schools at depths where the polar night makes even such faint light the primary visual input. Neopleurodon australis shares its world with the great whales. In the Southern Ocean, the blue whale, Balanoptera musculus, is the largest animal on Earth, reaching 30 meters in length and requiring several tons of Antarctic krill daily to sustain its vast metabolism. The humpback whale, the fin whale, the minke whale, the sperm whale, all are present in the Southern Ocean in numbers that, in this imagined world, approach their pre-whaling abundances. And in the water alongside these giants, Neopleurodon australis moves, smaller, quieter, deeper, older in its evolutionary lineage than any whale by a margin of tens of millions of years. There is no competition, really, between Neopleurodon and the great whales. They occupy overlapping but distinct ecological niches, the whales predominantly surface and mesopelagic, the pliosaur descendants predominantly mesopelagic and upper bathypelagic. The whales primarily filter feeding or suction feeding on densely aggregated prey. The pliosaur descendants primarily pursued predators on individual large prey items. In the vast ecology of the Southern Ocean, there is room for both and more. On certain still nights in the Southern Ocean, when the aurora australis moves across the sky in slow, silent waves of green and violet light, the surface of the sea below reflects those colors in shifting, ghostly patterns. And if you were there, if you were small enough and still enough and fortunate enough, you might see the surface disturb itself in a brief, quiet way that has nothing to do with the wind. A smooth, dark shape rising and falling at the surface. A breath drawn quickly and quietly in the cold air, and then gone again, back into the dark, back into the ancient, cold, productive water. It would look like nothing, like a seal, perhaps, or a piece of drifting kelp, like a trick of the light in the shifting aurora. It would look like nothing at all. And yet, it would be 160 million years of continuous evolutionary history, breathing the cold night air of the Southern Ocean, living its ancient, patient, perfectly adapted life, unaware of its own antiquity, untroubled by any memory of the warm Tethys, unaware that somewhere very far away and very long ago, the first teeth of its lineage were pressed into the limestone of a French Jurassic formation and waited 160 million years to be held in a scientist's hands and named. It would simply breathe and dive and move through the dark water toward the next meal, the same way its ancestors moved through the water of the Tethys, in the same ancient rhythms, following the same ancient gradients of temperature and chemistry and pressure that have guided the deep ocean predators of this world since before the dinosaurs walked the land. Simply there, simply alive, simply ancient. We have come a long way together. Through the warm, ancient light of the Jurassic Tethys, through the slow, the patient science of paleontology, and the meticulous work of researchers who spend their careers on their knees in the clay of Peterborough or the limestone of Normandy, recovering fragments of a world that ended 155 million years ago. Through the sensory wonder of a sea that no human eye has ever seen, a sea full of light and life and the extraordinary unhurried grace of animals that had no concept of their own impermanence. Through the great disruptions of geological time, the anoxic events, the mass extinctions, the slow closure of the Tethys and the opening of the Atlantic, and forward, always forward, through the patient accumulation of time into the imagined present. And now we rest. Not because the journey is over. The journey of deep time is never over. It is continuing right now, beneath your feet and beneath the ocean, and beneath the sediment of 1,000 Jurassic seabeds pressed into limestone and chalk and clay across the length of Europe. It is continuing in every living animal and every living ocean and every slow movement of the tectonic plates that are, at this moment, with a patience that makes all human patience seem almost frivolous, rearranging the surface of the world. But we rest because this is the place where the urgency falls away. Where the facts, the exact numbers, the verified measurements, the named scientists and the catalogued specimens give way to something that facts are not always equipped to carry. Wonder. Simple, undefended, unqualified wonder at the fact that a world as vast and as alive as the Jurassic Tethys existed at all. That it existed for tens of millions of years. That within it, an animal as perfectly formed as Liopleurodon ferox lived and hunted and breathed and, in its own ancient way, perceived and responded to the world around it with a sensory sophistication that we are only beginning to understand. That all of this happened without a single human being to observe it, to name it, to write it down. It happened in the complete and total absence of any witness, and yet it was entirely real. This is one of the most profound and humbling aspects of paleontology as a discipline, Not the discovery of spectacular specimens, not the reconstruction of ancient worlds from fragmentary evidence, not even the extraordinary detective work of reading evolutionary history from the shape of a tooth or the angle of a joint. It is this, the silent, persistent fact that the world was full before we arrived, and will be full after we depart, and that our presence here, remarkable and precious as it is a very recent addition to a very long story. Liopleurodon did not need to be observed to be real. The Tethys did not need to be named to be vast. The 160 million years of continuous ocean life did not need a human audience to unfold in their full, extraordinary, improbable beauty. And this is, in a strange and deeply comforting way, one of the most restful thoughts available to the human mind. Because if the world was full before us, if the oceans were ancient and alive and productive and wonderful before any human eye rested on them, then the world does not depend on us to hold it together. The deep ocean does not need our attention to continue doing what it has been doing for hundreds of millions of years. The tectonic plates do not need our permission to move. The deep currents do not need our understanding to circulate. The ancient, patient processes of geology and biology and chemistry that have shaped this world across time, scales that dwarf all of human history, are not waiting for us to acknowledge them before they continue. They are simply happening. Right now. In the deep water, in the slow movement of the continents, in the chemistry of the ocean, that is, at this moment, incorporating the calcium carbonate from 1 billion dead plankton cells into the slow accumulation of a chalk deposit that will not be dry land for another 50 million years. The world is happening. And we are here for a brief, extraordinary, luminous moment within that happening, awake enough to ask the question, or to wonder about Liopleurodon and the Tethys and what might have survived and what might still be moving through the dark water of the deep ocean. And then, inevitably, we will rest. We will sleep. And while we sleep, the world will continue. The deep currents will circulate. The ancient sediment will accumulate. The pressure of the deep ocean will press down on the dark water of the mesopelagic zone with the same 600 atmospheres of patient force that it has exerted every second of every hour of every day for the past 250 million years. And if something is out there, in the deep water, in the dark, breathing the cold night air of the Southern Ocean or the warm enclosed air of the Mediterranean in high summer, it will continue too. It will dive and surface and hunt and rest and live its ancient, patient, perfectly ordinary life in the deep ocean, completely indifferent to the question of its own survival, because survival is not a concept that animals contemplate. They simply live, or they do not. And the ones that live are the ones whose bodies and behaviors fit most closely to the world they inhabit. Liopleurodon fit its world perfectly. That is not in dispute. What we have been exploring tonight, in this long, slow, dreaming journey through deep time, is not really the question of whether it survived. It is the question of what it means that something can be so perfectly suited to a world and then have that world change. It is a question with more dimensions than any single answer can contain. Does the perfection of an adaptation make extinction more inevitable because the world will always eventually change? Or does it make survival more likely because the biological toolkit for solving a particular ecological problem is so well developed that it can find new applications in new environments? Is Liopleurodon a story about loss or a story about transformation? Perhaps it is both. Perhaps the most honest answer is that it is neither, that the categories of loss and transformation are human categories, imposed on a process that does not experience itself in human terms. The ocean does not mourn Liopleurodon. The Tethys, in its compressed Mediterranean remnant, does not remember the animal that once ruled it. Deep time does not carry grief, but we do. Or something like grief, something that is perhaps better named reverence or awe, or the particular species of tender melancholy that comes from understanding that beautiful things are temporary, and that their temporariness does not diminish their beauty, but somehow intensifies it. There is a kind of quiet available on the other side of this thought, a stillness that is not emptiness but fullness, the fullness of a world understood to be ancient and alive and ongoing beyond any individual moment of awareness. The fullness that comes from placing yourself, just for a moment, in the context of 160 million years of ocean life, and feeling how small and how brief and how extraordinary your own moment of consciousness is within that vast and patient span. Let that fullness settle now. Let the image of Liopleurodon, that great, dark, with patient shape moving through the green-gold light of the ancient Tethys, rest softly in your mind without urgency, without pressure, without the need to understand or explain or retain. It was there. It moved her through the warm water of a world that is now compressed into the stones beneath Europe's feet. It breathed air that is now part of the atmosphere we breathe today, its component molecules dispersed through 160 million years of chemical cycling into the water and the rock and the living bodies of 1 billion organisms that have come and gone since. It was as real as you are, as present in its moment as you are in yours. And the ocean continues, vast, dark, cold in its depths, ancient in its chemistry, patient beyond any patience we can imagine, moving its deep water in slow, centuries-long loops that carry the cold of the deep Pacific to the surface of the North Atlantic and the warmth of the tropics to the depths of the Southern Ocean, redistributing the energy and the chemistry of the world in the same great circulation that has been running in some form since before Liopleurodon was born. The last thought that will carry you forward into sleep is this. Somewhere in the world's ocean, in the deep, in the dark, in the perpetual cold that lies below the reach of any sunlight, something is moving that has been moving in one form or another for longer than any mountain range, longer than any ocean basin, longer than any continent in its current shape. Something that belongs to the deep time of this world in a way that no surface-dwelling creature can quite approach. Whether that something is a descendant of Liopleurodon, or a whale, or a shark, or a creature we have not yet named, or simply the water itself, moving in its ancient, faithful, inexhaustible rhythms, is perhaps less important than the awareness of its presence. The ancient world is not entirely past. The deep water still remembers. And you, right now, in this quiet moment between wakefulness and sleep, are as close to the ancient world as any human being can come, because in the slow, still, patient rhythm of your breathing and the gentle weight of your resting body, you are briefly, beautifully part of the same vast, ancient, ongoing process that produced Liopleurodon and the Tethys, and every extraordinary thing that has ever lived in the waters of this world. Rest now. The ocean is still there. And whenever you are ready to explore another world, we will be here.